The apartment was dark, submerged in the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm, save for the faint, synthetic glow of a nightlight in the corner. It was a small plastic moon, plugged into the wall, casting long, warped shadows across the bedroom floor. In that sliver of dim light, Simone Clark crouched between the bed and the wall, her knees pressed so hard into the hardwood floor that she knew they would bruise. But pain was a distant, irrelevant thing right now. The only thing that mattered was the warmth of the small body tucked against her chest. Simone had one hand pressed firmly, but gently, over her 6-year-old daughter's mouth. Her other arm was wrapped around Maya's small frame, a desperate shield against a world that had suddenly broken its hinges. She could feel Maya's heart hammering against her own ribs, a frantic, rabbit-fast rhythm that terrified her more than the men outside. Maya's eyes were wide, staring up at her mother with a confusion that was slowly bleeding into terror. Those eyes. Every time Simone looked down into them, even in the semi-darkness, she felt the ghost of a memory shiver down her spine. They were almond-shaped and the color of warm amber, liquid gold. They were beautiful, and they were dangerous, because every time Simone looked into them, she didn't just see her daughter. She saw him. Outside the bedroom door, the floorboards creaked. These were not the sounds of a neighbor passing by or a settling building. These were footsteps, heavy boots, deliberate, slow, and terrifyingly calm. A vibration buzzed against the floor where Simone had dropped her phone. The screen lit up, cutting through the gloom like a spotlight, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a text message from an unknown number. The preview read, "We know about the girl. You have 24 hours. But it was a lie. They hadn't given her 24 hours. They hadn't even given her 24 seconds. They were already inside. Simone felt her heart shatter. It was the guilt that hit her first, sharp and cold. 3 days ago, her home office wall had looked like the inside of a conspiracy theorist's mind. Red string connecting grainy photographs to shipping manifests, a map of the Savannah port, names of shell companies. She was a journalist. She thought she was the hunter, tracking a story that would expose a massive human trafficking network. She hadn't realized until this very moment that she was just the prey. The footsteps stopped right outside the bedroom door. The handle jiggled. Locked. A pause. She knew what came next. She had maybe 60 seconds before they kicked that door in. 60 seconds to make a choice she had sworn on her life she would never make. Her finger hovered over the contact list on her phone. She scrolled past her editor. She scrolled past the police commissioner, a man she suspected was on the payroll of the very people hunting her. She stopped at a contact labeled simply SH. For 6 years, that name had been a ghost in her phone, a digital gravestone. She had run from him the moment she realized she was pregnant. She had run because he was a man who lived in shadows, a man who commanded violence the way other men commanded a meeting room. She had run to keep Maya safe from his world. And now the irony tasted like ash in her mouth. To save Maya, she had to invite the devil back in. The wood of the doorframe groaned under the weight of a shoulder slamming against it. Maya whimpered against Simone's hand, a tiny, high-pitched sound of pure fear. That sound broke Simone's resolve. She pressed the call button. The line began to ring. It was a long, hollow sound, stretching across oceans, across time zones, connecting a terrifying present in Atlanta to a dangerous past in Seoul. Thousands of miles away, in a penthouse office overlooking the glittering neon skyline of Seoul, South Korea, a private phone began to buzz on a glass desk. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of color. Lim Sung-ho stood by the glass, watching his empire breathe below him. At 34, he controlled more of the underground economy than most governments knew existed. He was a man who had built walls of ice around his life. When his private line rang, a line only 5 people on Earth possessed, he didn't startle. He simply turned, his movements fluid and precise, and answered. Private line? His voice was deep, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. Atlanta area code. Speak. Back in the dark apartment, time seemed to warp. The bedroom door splintered with a deafening crack. Wood flew across the room. A silhouette filled the broken frame. A man in tactical gear, nameless and faceless. Simone gasped, the air rushing out of her lungs. Sung-ho, she breathed. On the other side of the world, Sung-ho froze. His hand tightened on the phone so hard the knuckles turned white. He hadn't heard that voice in 6 years. It was thinner now, strained with terror, but it was hers. The only woman who had ever walked away from him. I know I have no right, Simone rushed out, her voice trembling as the intruder stepped into the room. I know I left. But we need... A crash echoed in the background of the call. A child screamed, Mommy! Terrifying and shrill. Sung-ho stopped breathing. Please! Simone sobbed into the phone, her voice rising in hysteria. She has your eyes, Sung-ho. She has your eyes, and they are going to kill us both. The line went dead. The silence that followed in the penthouse in Seoul was heavier than the storm outside. Sung-ho stood paralyzed, the phone still pressed to his ear. The words echoed in the empty room, rearranging his entire reality. She has your eyes. A child. His child. For the first time in a decade, the man who feared nothing felt a tremor in his hands. He didn't yell. He didn't throw the phone. He simply lowered it, his face turning into a mask of terrifying resolve. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. Get the jet ready, he said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly quiet. And get me everyone we have in the United States. Someone just took my daughter. The silence that followed the disconnected call was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air right out of the penthouse. For 15 years, Lim Sung-ho had lived in the shadows. He had built an empire from dirt and blood, transforming himself from a street fighter in the back alleys of Busan into a man who moved markets with a whisper. His hands had never betrayed him, not during his first knife fight in the rain, not when he buried the men who tried to usurp him, and not even when he stood before a judge and lied without blinking. But now, staring at the phone that had gone dead in his palm, his hand trembled. It was a microscopic tremor, invisible to anyone but him, but it felt like an earthquake. 6 years of silence had ended in 17 seconds of static and screaming. Sung-ho turned away from the desk and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. The city of Seoul sprawled beneath him, a living organism of neon arteries and steel bones glowing through the heavy rain. Usually, this view made him feel like a god. Tonight, it made him feel terrifyingly helpless. The words echoed in his mind, bouncing off the walls of his carefully constructed solitude. She has your eyes. He closed his own eyes, and for a split second, He wasn't the chairman of the Cheongha Group. He was just a man who had let the only good thing in his life walk away because he thought he was protecting her. He had told himself it was mercy. He had told himself that his world would devour a woman like Simone Clark. He never imagined that she had taken more than just her heart when she left. She had taken his legacy. She had taken a daughter he didn't know existed. The door to his office slid open with a soft hiss. Yong-hee, his chief of intelligence and arguably the most dangerous woman with a keyboard in East Asia, stepped in. She didn't need to ask if something was wrong. She had likely monitored the spike in his heart rate through his smartwatch, or simply felt the shift in the air pressure of the room. "Sir?" she said, her voice clipped and professional. "The trace on the private line is complete. The call originated from a cell tower in Atlanta, Georgia, 2847 Peachtree Avenue. The connection lasted 17 seconds before termination." Sung Ho didn't turn around immediately. He stared at his reflection in the dark glass, the sharp jawline, the tailored suit, the eyes that people said looked like polished obsidian. "She has your eyes." "Atlanta," he said, the name tasting like ash. "Get Kim Yi-won on the line, now." He turned then, and Yong-hee paused. She had worked for him for a decade, had seen him order hits and corporate takeovers with the same bored expression. She had never seen this look. It wasn't anger. It was something far more volatile. It was desperation. "Kim is already on the encrypted channel," Yong-hye said, tapping her tablet. "I've pulled the satellite schematics of the building. Police scanners in Fulton County just reported a 911 call about shots fired at that address." The blood drained from Sung Ho's face, leaving him pale and lethal. "Shots fired?" He snatched the tablet from her, his eyes scanning the scrolling data streams. "I want a team there yesterday. I want every asset we have on the eastern seaboard moving toward Georgia. Tell Kim to burn every favor, bribe every official, and break every speed limit. If a single hair on their heads is touched—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "There are 2 targets," he continued, his voice low and rough. "Simone Clark and a child, a 6-year-old girl named Maya." He looked up at Yong-hee, his eyes burning. "My daughter." Yong-hye's professional mask slipped. For a fraction of a second, her eyes widening in genuine shock. But she recovered instantly. "Understood, sir. Priority Alpha, extraction and containment. Do we have rules of engagement?" Sung Ho walked back to the window, looking toward the east, toward the ocean that separated him from the chaos unfolding in a dark apartment halfway across the world. He thought about the men who had broken down that door, men who frightened a child, men who made Simone, the bravest woman he had ever known, beg for her life. "Rules of engagement?" Sung Ho repeated softly. He picked up a crystal tumbler from his desk and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds. "No rules," he snarled, the beast inside him finally clawing its way to the surface. "Kill them all." Back in Atlanta, the world was a blur of motion and adrenaline. The moment the bedroom door had exploded inward, Simone hadn't waited for the man to raise his weapon. She had moved with the desperate, hysterical strength of a mother cornered. She had thrown a heavy ceramic lamp at the doorway, not waiting to see if it connected, and shoved the window sash up. The cold night air rushed in, biting at her skin. "Climb, Maya, climb!" she had screamed, shoving her weeping daughter onto the rusted iron of the fire escape. They were moving now, scrambling down the metal ladder as shouting erupted from the apartment above. Simone didn't look back. She couldn't. She grabbed Maya's small, trembling hand and hit the alleyway running. They ran past the overflowing dumpsters, past the graffiti-stained brick, sprinting toward the lights of the main road. Simone's bare feet slapped against the wet pavement, but she felt no pain. Her mind was singular, focused entirely on the small hand gripping hers. They had escaped the room, but the hunt had just begun. And somewhere across the world, a dragon had just woken up. The city of Atlanta was a labyrinth of noise and blinding lights, indifferent to the two figures stumbling through its veins. Simone kept her head down, her grip on Maya's hand so tight her fingers ached. They had merged into the evening foot traffic, trying to become invisible, trying to look like just another mother and daughter hurrying home after a late dinner. But invisibility was a luxury they had lost the moment that door splintered. Every siren that wailed in the distance made Simone's pulse stutter. Every pair of headlights sweeping across the wet pavement felt like a spotlight. Maya was sobbing quietly now, a hitching, rhythmic sound that tore at Simone's heart. The child was barefoot, her socks soaked through with alley water and grime, shivering in the cold damp of the Georgia night. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry," Simone whispered, over and over, a mantra of guilt. She scanned the street. They needed people. They needed witnesses. The bus terminal. It was 3 blocks away, a fortress of fluorescent lights and security cameras. If they could get there, they could buy time. Simone ducked into the shadow of an awning as a police cruiser rolled by slowly. She couldn't trust them. She couldn't trust anyone. Her phone, clutching in her sweating palm, remained dark. She had made the call. She had cast the die. Now she had to pray that the monster she had summoned was faster than the monsters chasing her. Half a world away, the atmosphere in the Seoul penthouse had shifted from shock to cold, calculated warfare. The room was no longer an office. It was a command center. The floor-to-ceiling screens that usually displayed stock market fluctuations and shipping routes were now alive with the chaotic digital pulse of Atlanta. Yonghai's fingers flew across her holographic keyboard, stitching together a tapestry of surveillance. Traffic cameras, ATM feeds, police body cam frequencies. "I have them," Yonghai announced, her voice cutting through the hum of the servers. Facial recognition hit, Greyhound bus terminal downtown. Camera 4B. Sung-ho leaned over the desk, his breath catching in his throat. The image on the screen was grainy, filtered through the harsh greenish tint of a security feed, but it was enough. He saw a woman in a torn coat, her hair wild, eyes darting left and right, and huddled against her leg, looking small and terrified, was a child. Maya. Sung-ho stared at the pixelated image of his daughter. It was the first time he had ever seen her. She had her mother's curls, pulled into 2 messy puffs that bobbed as she moved. But even in the low-resolution feed, he saw the set of her jaw. She wasn't wailing. She was holding on. She was enduring. She's strong, he thought, a surge of fierce, terrifying pride warring with his fear. She's mine. Kim is 3 minutes out, Yonghai reported, the tension in her voice ratcheting up. But sir, look at the feed. Top right corner. Sung-ho's gaze snapped to the corner of the screen. A black SUV had pulled up to the curb outside the terminal. 2 men stepped out. They weren't moving like travelers. They moved with the predatory coordination of wolves. They wore earpieces. They were scanning the crowd. "They found her," Sung-ho whispered, the blood draining from his face. "They found her before we did." He grabbed the microphone on his desk, opening a direct channel to his team on the ground. "Kim, hostiles are on site. You are out of time. Engage. Engage now." In the terminal, the air felt electric, charged with unseen violence. Simone had pulled Maya onto a metal bench near the ticket counters, trying to catch her breath. She smoothed Maya's hair, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Are the bad men gone?" Maya asked, her voice small and fragile. "For now," Simone lied, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "You're doing so good, Maya. I'm so proud of you." "Did you call my daddy?" The question landed like a physical blow. Simone froze. She looked down at her daughter, seeing the absolute trust in those amber eyes. Eyes that were a mirror of the man currently screaming orders across an encrypted line thousands of miles away. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I did." "Is he coming?" Before Simone could answer, a shadow fell over them. She looked up. A man in a dark leather jacket was standing 5 feet away. He wasn't looking at the schedule board. He was looking directly at Maya. He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Simone had ever seen. He raised a hand to his ear, tapping a radio. "Target acquired," he said, his voice drowned out by the terminal announcer. But the intent was clear. Simone grabbed Maya and bolted. "Run!" she screamed, shoving through a crowd of bewildered travelers. "Secure the exits!" the man shouted behind them. Another man appeared from the bathroom, blocking their path. They were boxed in. Simone spun around, clutching Maya to her chest, backing toward the glass doors. She braced herself for the impact, for the hands that would tear her child away. Suddenly, tires screeched outside, a sound so loud it pierced the glass walls. A black sedan jumped the curb, smashing through the glass entryway in a shower of glittering shards. Panic erupted. People screamed and dove for cover. The sedan doors flew open before the wheels even stopped spinning. 4 men in dark tactical suits poured out of the vehicle, moving with a precision that was terrifying to behold. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They formed a phalanx, a wall of human steel between the traffickers and the mother and child. The lead man, Kim Yi-won, spotted Simone. He didn't look like a savior. He looked like a soldier. He raised a weapon, firing 2 warning shots into the ceiling that shattered the lights and plunged the terminal into semi-darkness. "Mrs. Clark!" he roared over the chaos. "Get in the car! Now!" The traffickers hesitated, stunned by the overwhelming force. That hesitation was all Simone needed. She scooped Maya up, adrenaline surging through her veins, and sprinted toward the open door of the sedan. Bullets sparked against the pavement behind her, but the wall of Sung-ho's men returned fire, suppressing the attackers with disciplined, rhythmic bursts. Simone dove into the back seat, shielding Maya with her body. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing them inside a capsule of leather and silence. "Go! Go! Go!" Kim shouted from the front seat. The car lurched backward, tires smoking, and sped away into the night, leaving the chaos of the terminal behind. In the back seat, gasping for air, Simone looked down. Maya was safe. Shaking, terrified, but safe. In Seoul, Sung-ho watched the feed go black as the car sped out of camera range. He slumped back in his chair, his shirt soaked through with sweat. For 15 years, he had won wars without breaking a sweat. Tonight, he had almost lost everything. They are secure, Yong-hee said quietly. They are en route to the airfield. Sung-ho closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he felt he'd been holding for 6 years. Bring them home, he whispered. The flight across the Pacific was a blur of sterile luxury that felt like a hallucination. The private jet, a Gulfstream G650 with blacked-out windows, cut through the stratosphere in near silence. Inside, the cabin smelled of rich leather and expensive scotch, a scent that made Simone's stomach churn with memory. She sat rigid in a cream-colored armchair, a blanket pulled up to her chin, watching Maya sleep on the converted divan across the aisle. Her daughter was finally peaceful, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that Simone tried to synchronize her own breathing to. Maya's face was clean now, the grime of the Atlanta alleyways wiped away with warm towels provided by a flight attendant who spoke in hushed, deferential tones. But Simone couldn't scrub the fear from her own skin. She was safe, yes, but she had traded one danger for another. She was flying straight into the heart of the beast she had spent 6 years, Sri, running from. 13 hours later, the jet began its descent. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their arrival in Seoul. Simone looked out the window. Below them, the city was a sprawling galaxy of light, glowing through a heavy curtain of rain. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. It was his city. As the landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan, Simone felt a fresh wave of panic. She smoothed her hair, which was still tangled and wild, and looked at her reflection in the darkened glass. She didn't look like the fierce, investigative journalist who had taken down senators and syndicates. She looked like a refugee. The plane taxied to a halt in a private hangar, far removed from the commercial terminals of Incheon International. The engines whined down into silence. The cabin door opened, and the humid, heavy air of a Korean summer night rushed in, carrying the scent of wet asphalt and ozone. "Mrs. Clark," Kim Yi-won said softly, appearing at her side. "He is waiting." Simone nodded, her throat tight. She woke Maya gently. "Baby, we're here. Wake up." Maya rubbed her eyes, disoriented. "Are we safe?" she mumbled. "Yes," Simone whispered, lifting her daughter into her arms. "We're safe." They descended the airstairs. The hangar was vast and dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the concrete. A convoy of black SUVs waited in a semicircle, engines idling. But Simone didn't look at the cars. She looked at the man standing alone in front of them. Lim Sung-ho stood under the shelter of a black umbrella held by an assistant, though he seemed indifferent to the mist blowing in. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like armor, his posture rigid, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked exactly the same as the day she had left him, ageless, sharp, and radiating a quiet, terrifying power. But as Simone stepped onto the tarmac, she saw the crack in the armor. His eyes. They weren't cold tonight. They were burning. He dismissed the umbrella with a wave of his hand and stepped out into the rain, closing the distance between them. He stopped 5 feet away. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "You look," Sung-ho started, his voice rougher than she remembered. He stopped, seemingly unable to find the words. He looked at Simone, really looked at her, cataloging every bruise, every line of exhaustion on her face. "I should have been there sooner." "You weren't supposed to be there at all," Simone said, her voice trembling but defiant. I didn't want this, Sung-ho. I didn't want her to know this life. I know, he replied quietly. You ran to save her from me. And tonight, you had to run to me to save her. He took a step closer, the rain darkening his shoulders. I'm not going to ask for your forgiveness, Simone. I don't deserve it. But I am asking for a chance to look at her. Simone hesitated. She felt Maya shift in her arms, waking up fully now, looking around at the strange man standing in the rain. Slowly, Simone lowered Maya to the ground. Maya, she said, her voice breaking. There's someone I want you to meet. Maya stood on the wet concrete, clutching Simone's leg. She looked up at Sung-ho. Sung-ho dropped to one knee. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the dozen armed men watching from the perimeter. He lowered himself until he was eye level with the 6-year-old girl. He didn't reach out. He didn't try to hug her. He just stayed there, waiting, letting her see him. Hello, Maya, he said. His voice was unrecognizable, soft, gentle, stripped of all command. Maya studied him with a seriousness that belonged to an adult. She tilted her head, her curls bouncing. Then she looked at his eyes. She leaned in closer, her own amber eyes widening as they locked onto the mirror image of themselves. Mommy said you have eyes like mine, Maya whispered. Sung-ho swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I do, he managed to say. Exactly like yours. Are you my daddy? The question hung in the damp air. Sung-ho looked up at Simone for a brief second, a silent question in his gaze. Simone gave a barely perceptible nod. Sung-ho looked back at his daughter, tears mixed with the rain on his face. Yes, he said, his voice cracking. I am your father. Maya considered this. She looked at the scary men in the cars, then back at the man kneeling in the rain. She stepped forward and placed a small hand on his wet cheek. You look sad, she said. Sung-ho closed his eyes, leaning into her small palm as if it were the only anchor in a storm. I was, he whispered. I was very sad for a long time, but I'm not anymore. He opened his eyes and looked at Simone. Let's go home, he said. Nobody touches either of you ever again. I promise. As they walked toward the waiting car, Simone realized with a jolt that the danger hadn't ended in Atlanta. It had just changed shape. She had brought her daughter into the lion's den, and the lion was already in love. The empire was about to shake. The penthouse was less of a home and more of a fortress suspended in the sky. The private elevator opened directly into a living space that spanned the entire top floor of the Chongha Tower, a space of polished marble, black steel, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a 360-degree view of a sleeping soul. Maya stepped out of the elevator first, her small hand still gripping her stuffed elephant, her eyes wide with wonder. To a 6-year-old, this wasn't a criminal's lair. It was a castle. She spun around, looking at the city lights below, her fear from the alleyway momentarily forgotten in the face of such overwhelming scale. But Simone didn't look at the view. She looked at the security detail stationed by the doors. She looked at the cameras blinking in the corners of the ceiling. She saw the cage. It was gilded, it was temperature-controlled, and it was magnificent. But it was a cage nonetheless. She needs to eat, Sung-ho said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the room. He seemed out of place in his own home, unsure of where to stand, how to act. He was a man used to ordering executions, not ordering dinner for a first grader. I have a chef on standby. What is she like? Simone let out a short, exhausted breath, unzipping Maya's coat. She likes grilled cheese and tomato soup, Sung Ho. Not whatever five-course meal you're planning. Sung Ho nodded seriously, as if she had just given him a complex tactical briefing. He tapped his earpiece. Grilled cheese, tomato soup, immediately. An hour later, the penthouse was quiet. Maya had eaten with a voracious appetite that broke Sung Ho's heart, and now she was asleep in a guest room that was larger than their entire apartment in Atlanta. Simone stood in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, ensuring the nightmare hadn't followed them into the room. When she finally turned away, she found Sung Ho waiting for her in the main hall, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He offered her one. She hesitated, then took it. The burn of the alcohol felt grounding. "You can't keep us here," Simone said, walking to the window. She stared out at the dark city, refusing to meet his eyes. "This isn't a life. It's a holding cell." "It's the safest place on earth," Sung Ho countered, his voice rising slightly. "Nobody gets in here unless I allow it. You saw what happened in Atlanta. If I hadn't intervened..." "If you hadn't built this empire," Simone spun around, her eyes flashing, "there wouldn't be anyone hunting us in the first place. Do you think I don't know why they targeted me? My investigation led to your shipping routes, Sung Ho. The traffickers were using Cheongha containers. They were using your network." The glass in Sung Ho's hand cracked. Whiskey dripped onto the marble floor, but he didn't seem to notice the shard slicing into his palm. His face went deathly still. "I deal in information," he said, his voice a low growl. "I deal in gambling, in loans, in construction. I do not traffic children. I have never allowed that filth in my organization." "Then you aren't looking closely enough," Simone shot back. "Because the evidence I found didn't just point to your company. It pointed to your inner circle." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Sung Ho stared at her, the implication sinking in like a poisoned blade. Before he could respond, the secure door to the command center burst open. Yong Hai rushed in, her face pale, a tablet clutched in her hands. She stopped when she saw Simone, but Sung Ho waved her forward. "Speak," he commanded. "Sir," Yong Hai stammered, "I've finished the forensic analysis of the Atlanta attack team. We recovered a phone from one of the shooters." She swallowed hard. "They received an authorization code to move on the target, a kill-on-sight order." "Who authorized it?" Sung Ho demanded. "The code used," Yong Hai whispered, looking down at the floor, terrified to speak the truth, was level 7 clearance. It belongs to Director Kang. Sung Ho froze. Kang Day 1, his second in command, his brother in everything but blood, the man who had stood back to back with him in the gutter when they had nothing, the man who was currently running the logistics division while Sung Ho played father. "Kang," Sung Ho repeated, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. "He didn't just authorize the hit," Simone said softly, stepping forward, piecing the puzzle together in real time. "He authorized the trafficking. He used your blind spots, Sung Ho. You were so busy looking at the horizon trying to be a legitimate businessman that you didn't see the rot sitting right next to you." Sung Ho walked slowly to the window. He looked at his reflection. A man who thought he was a king, realizing he was just a puppet master whose strings had been cut. The rage that filled him now wasn't hot. It was glacial. It was the cold, absolute certainty of violence. He thinks, "I'm weak," Sung Ho whispered to the glass. "He thinks having a daughter makes me vulnerable." He turned back to the room. His eyes were no longer human. They were the eyes of a predator who had just smelled blood in his own den. "Yong Hai," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Lock down the building, seal the elevators, cut the external lines." "Sir?" Yong Hai asked. "What are you going to do?" Sung Ho looked at the closed door of Maya's bedroom, then at Simone. "I'm going to take out the trash." He unbuttoned his suit jacket, revealing the shoulder holster beneath. "Simone, stay with Maya. Do not open that door for anyone but me." "Where are you going?" Simone asked, fear spiking in her chest. "Downstairs," Sung Ho said, checking the magazine of his pistol. "The war isn't in Atlanta anymore. It's in the lobby." The elevator descent was smooth, a silent glide through the spine of the building that belied the violence waiting at the bottom. Sung Ho watched the digital numbers count. Down. 40, 39, 38. With every floor that passed, he shed a layer of the man he had tried to become for the last 6 years. The legitimate businessman, the philanthropist, the man who followed rules. He left them all in the shaft. By the time the indicator hit the 20th floor, the executive level, the only thing left standing in the elevator cabin was the Dragon of Soul. He checked the magazine of his pistol one last time. Full. It wouldn't be enough. The doors slid open with a cheerful chime that sounded obscene in the silence. The executive corridor, usually bustling with analysts and secretaries, was deserted. The lights were dimmed to emergency levels, casting long, bloody shadows across the plush carpet. Sung Ho stepped out, his footsteps making no sound. He knew this floor better than he knew the lines on his own palm. He knew where the cameras were blind. He knew which walls were bulletproof. "I didn't think you'd come down yourself," a voice called out from the shadows of the conference room at the end of the hall. "I thought you'd send Kim." Sung Ho didn't stop walking. "Kim is loyal," he said, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "But this is family business, and you are family, aren't you, Day One?" Kang Dai-won stepped out into the light. He looked impeccable, as always. His suit was unwrinkled, his hair perfect, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked like a CEO. But behind him, stepping out from the offices and cubicles, were 12 men holding submachine guns. They weren't Chonghua security. They were mercenaries. "I was family," Kang corrected, swirling his drink. "Until you decided that morality was more important than profit. We built this empire on leverage, Hung Nim, and then you started cutting off our limbs. No drugs, no trafficking, no arms. You wanted us to be clean." He sneered. "Clean doesn't pay the bills, and it certainly doesn't protect us. So you sold children to fill the gap?" Sung Ho stopped 10 paces away. He didn't look at the guns pointed at his chest. He looked only at Kang. "You used my ships to transport human lives like cattle." "It's a commodity," Kang shrugged, setting his glass down. "And business is booming. Or it was, until your girlfriend started poking around. I tried to handle it quietly in Atlanta. But you had to bring them here. To our sanctuary." Kang shook his head. "You compromised us. You chose a woman and a brat over the Brotherhood." "That brat," Sung Ho said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "is my daughter." Kang laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. "Then she can die with her father. It's a tragedy, really." Chairman Lim dies in a tragic office fire alongside his newfound family. The board will be devastated, but I'll guide them through the grief. Kang raised his hand, signaling the men to fire, but Sung Ho was already moving. He didn't run away. He surged forward. In the split second before Kang's hand dropped, Sung Ho fired. He didn't aim for Kang. He aimed for the fire suppression system on the ceiling. The bullet shattered the sensor. Whoosh! Halon gas and high-pressure water exploded into the hallway, instantly filling the corridor with a thick, white fog and deafening noise. The mercenaries shouted, their vision obscured. Gunfire erupted, wild and panicked, bullets shredding the walls and the ceiling, but Sung Ho was already a ghost in the mist. He slid across the wet marble, kicking the legs out from under the nearest mercenary. As the man fell, Sung Ho used him as a shield, returning fire with lethal precision. One shot, one target. He wasn't fighting like a man, he was fighting like a force of nature. He moved through the smoke, a blur of violence, disarming one man, striking another with the butt of his gun, disappearing back into the white fog before they could track him. "Kill him!" Kang screamed from somewhere in the chaos. "He's just one man." Sung Ho reloaded in the dark, his back pressed against a filing cabinet. He was breathing hard, blood trickling from a graze on his cheek. He was one man, yes, but he was the man who had built this building. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a remote override for the building's security shutters. He pressed the button. Heavy steel blast doors slammed down over the exits and the elevators, sealing the floor. "I'm not stuck in here with you, Day One," Sung Ho shouted over the hiss of the gas. "You're stuck in here with me." The psychological shift was instant. The mercenaries stopped firing. They realized they were trapped in the dark with a legend. But just as Sung Ho prepared to finish it, his earpiece crackled. It was Simone. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with terror. "Sung Ho, the elevator, the service elevator. Someone is coming up. They're cutting through the doors." Sung Ho's blood ran cold. The executive floor was a distraction. Kang had split his forces. While Sung Ho was fighting down here, a second team was heading to the roof, to the penthouse, to Maya. "Simone," Sung Ho barked, abandoning the fight. "Get to the panic room, now." He looked at the sealed blast doors of the main elevators. He had locked himself in. He had trapped the enemy, but he had also trapped himself away from the only thing that mattered. He looked at the stairwell door. It was reinforced steel. He turned back to the terrified mercenaries and a pale-faced Kang. Sung Ho raised his gun, his eyes burning with a fury that made the men step back. "Get out of my way," he roared, charging through the smoke toward the stairwell, "or I will burn this entire tower down with you inside." The stairwell was a concrete throat, gray and echoing, spiraling upward into darkness. Sung Ho hit the first landing at a dead sprint, his lungs already burning from the halon gas on the executive floor. 20 floors. He had to climb 20 floors to reach them. In a normal life, that was a workout. Tonight, it was a gauntlet. He took the steps 3 at a time, his legs pumping like pistons, ignoring the scream of his muscles. Every footfall slapped against the concrete, a rhythmic countdown to either salvation or ruin. Floor 25. He could hear his own heartbeat thudding in his ears, louder than the gunfire he had left behind. He wasn't thinking about his empire anymore. He wasn't thinking about the betrayal. He was thinking about a pair of amber eyes looking up at him in the rain. He was thinking about the promise he made. Nobody touches either of you ever again. Above him, in the penthouse, the sanctuary had been breached. The service elevator, usually used for catering and cleaning crews, had been the weak point. Simone stood in the hallway, clutching a heavy marble statue she had grabbed from a pedestal. She could hear the high-pitched whine of a plasma cutter slicing through the steel doors of the elevator shaft. Sparks showered onto the floor like angry fireflies. Maya was behind her, hiding in the walk-in closet of the master bedroom, instructed to stay under the clothes and cover her ears. "Mommy," Maya's voice drifted out, small and trembling. "Stay down, baby! Don't move!" Simone hissed, her eyes fixed on the elevator doors. The metal groaned, glowing cherry red, and then gave way. A section of the door fell inward with a heavy clang. Through the smoke, 3 men stepped out. They weren't wearing masks. They didn't need to. They were here to sanitize the scene. The lead man saw Simone standing there, improvised weapon in hand, and he didn't even blink. He raised his rifle. "Mrs. Clark," he said, his voice bored. "Where is the girl?" Simone didn't answer. She threw the statue. It was a desperate, clumsy throw, but it caught the lead man in the shoulder, knocking him off balance. He stumbled back, his finger tightening on the trigger. A burst of gunfire chewed up the ceiling, plaster raining down like snow. Simone turned and ran, diving into the master bedroom and slamming the heavy oak door. She locked it, bolted it, and dragged a dresser across the floor to barricade it. It was a futile gesture against assault rifles, but it bought seconds, and seconds were all she had. Floor 38. Sung Ho was gasping for air now, sweat stinging his eyes. His legs felt like lead. He could hear the muffled sound of shots fired 2 floors up. The sound galvanized him, injecting a fresh spike of adrenaline into his exhausted system. He didn't slow down. He accelerated. He hit the door to the 40th floor with his shoulder, bursting through it like a battering ram. He emerged into the penthouse hallway just as the men were setting a charge on the bedroom door. The 3 attackers turned, surprised to see the chairman himself, disheveled, bleeding, and panting, standing at the end of the hall. They had expected him to be dead downstairs. They raised their weapons. Sung Ho didn't stop to negotiate. He didn't stop to breathe. He raised his pistol and fired while moving, a seamless, flowing motion that he had, perfected in the alleyways of Busan. Bang. Bang. The first man dropped. The second man scrambled for cover behind a marble pillar. "Get inside!" Sung Ho roared at the bedroom door, suppressing the remaining attackers with a hail of bullets. He dove behind a leather sofa as the hallway erupted into a crossfire. Bullets shredded the expensive furniture, feathers and stuffing exploding into the air. Inside the bedroom, Simone huddled over Maya in the closet, covering the girl's ears with her hands. "It's okay. It's okay," she whispered, though she knew it wasn't. The doorframe was splintering. The barricade was shaking. "Sung Ho!" she screamed, her voice piercing the noise of the gunfight. Hearing her voice was the final catalyst. Sung Ho looked at the remaining attacker, who was pinning him down from the kitchen island. Sung Ho had 1 magazine left. He took a deep breath, calculated the angle, and stood up. He walked out into the open. It was a move of pure arrogance or pure suicide. The attacker, startled by the target presenting himself, swung his rifle around. But Sung Ho was faster. He didn't fire. He threw his empty gun at the man's face, a heavy metal projectile that smashed into the mercenary's nose. As the man flinched, blinded by pain, Sung-ho closed the distance. He didn't need a gun anymore. He used his hands, his elbows, his rage. It was over in 3 seconds. The man lay unconscious on the floor. Silence fell over the penthouse, heavy and ringing. The smell of gunpowder and burnt circuitry hung in the air. Sung-ho walked to the bedroom door. He didn't knock. He leaned his forehead against the splintered wood. "Simone," he rasped, his voice wrecked. "It's me. It's done." The sound of the dresser being dragged away was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. The lock clicked. The door opened. Simone stood there, pale and shaking, but alive. Behind her, peeking out from the closet, was Maya. Sung-ho looked at them, blood dripping from his knuckles. His suit ruined, his chest heaving. He looked like a monster. But when Maya saw him, she didn't recoil. She ran. She bolted across the room and slammed into his legs, hugging him with a force that nearly knocked him over. "Daddy!" she cried. Sung-ho sank to his knees, wrapping his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He shook, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. He looked up at Simone, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "I told you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I told you I'd come." Simone dropped to her knees beside them, wrapping her arms around both of them. For a moment, on the floor of a ruined penthouse, amidst shattered glass and unconscious hitmen, they were just a family. But the radio on the fallen mercenary's belt crackled to life. "Team 2, report. Did you secure the package? Team 1 is compromised. Police are surrounding the building. We need to exit. Now." Sung-ho's head snapped up. Police. And not just any police. Corrupt. Officers on Kang's payroll, or worse, legitimate authorities who would arrest him and separate him from Maya forever. The walls were closing in. "We can't stay here," Sung-ho said, standing up and pulling Maya into his arms. "The building is burned. My name is burned. We have to run." "Run where?" Simone asked, wiping her eyes. "The whole world is looking for us." Sung-ho walked to the window, looking out at the city he used to rule. "Not the world," he said. "Just the city. We're going to the mountains, to the place where ghosts go to disappear." The wind on the rooftop helipad was savage, whipping the rain into horizontal sheets that stung the skin like needles. Sung-ho held Maya tight against his chest, shielding her face from the gale, while Simone ran beside them, bent low against the rotor wash. A black helicopter sat on the pad, its blades already spinning, cutting through the storm with a rhythmic, deafening thump, thump, thump. This was the failsafe, the exit strategy Sung-ho had paid a fortune for, but hoped never to use. Below them, at the base of the tower, the streets were a kaleidoscope of red and blue police lights. The sirens were a distant, wailing chorus, a song of an empire crumbling. But up here, there was only the wind and the waiting machine. The pilot, a man whose loyalty had been bought with silence and gold years ago, didn't ask questions. He simply slid the door open. Sung-ho practically threw Simone inside, then climbed in after her with Maya. The moment the door slid shut, locking out the wind and the noise, the cabin felt like a decompression chamber. "Go," Sung-ho ordered into the headset. "North route. Stay below the radar floor until we clear the city limits." The helicopter lurched upward, banking hard to the left. Simone pressed her face against the cold glass. She watched the Cheongha Tower recede into the distance, a monolith of steel and light that was now a crime scene. She watched the police cars, tiny as toys, swarms, the entrance. She was leaving behind her life, her career, her identity. She looked at Sung Ho. He wasn't looking back. He was staring forward into the dark, his jaw set in a line of granite. He had just burned down his own house to save them. The flight took 40 minutes. The sprawling neon galaxy of Seoul slowly gave way to the encroaching darkness of the countryside. The lights thinned out, replaced by the deep, impenetrable black of the mountains. The Gyeonggi province rose up to meet them, a landscape of jagged peaks and dense pine forests shrouded in mist. This was the part of Korea that felt ancient, untouched by the frantic pulse of the capital. It was a place for ghosts. They landed in a clearing carved out of the forest, the skids touching down on wet grass. The engine whined down, and the silence that rushed in was startling. It was heavy, thick with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. "We walk from here," Sung Ho said, unbuckling Maya. "The house is through the trees. It's unmapped." They moved through the woods in silence. The path was narrow, lined with towering trees that blocked out the sky. Finally, the safe house emerged from the gloom. It wasn't a mansion. It was a structure of timber and stone, designed to blend into the mountain, invisible from the air. There were no golden gates, no security teams, no marble floors, just a sturdy wooden door and windows dark against the night. Sung Ho unlocked the door and ushered them inside. The interior was cold, the air stale from disuse. He flicked a switch, and a generator hummed to life somewhere deep underground. Warm yellow light flooded the room, revealing simple furniture, a stone fireplace, and shelves lined with dust. "It's not much," Sung Ho said, closing the door and bolting it. He looked almost embarrassed, stripped of his penthouse armor. "I bought this place 10 years ago, before the money got complicated. I thought I might need a place to be just a person." Simone looked around. It was rugged. It was real. It was the first honest thing she had seen associated with him. She sat down on the sofa, her legs finally giving out. Maya, resilient as ever, rubbed her eyes and looked at the fireplace. "Is there a TV?" she asked, breaking the tension. Sung Ho let out a short, incredulous laugh, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. "No TV, sweetheart, but we can make a fire." For the next hour, the king of the Seoul underworld knelt on a rug, stacking logs and kindling, teaching his daughter how to strike a match. Simone watched them from the kitchen, where she was boiling water for tea. She watched the way Sung Ho's hands, lethal just hours ago, moved with infinite patience as he guided Maya's small fingers. She saw the way the firelight softened the hard planes of his face. "He's good with her," a voice whispered in her head. A dangerous voice. "He loves her." "He's a criminal," another voice argued. "He destroyed your life." Both voices were right. When the fire was crackling, and Maya had finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling up on the rug with a blanket, Sung Ho stood up and walked to the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, staying a respectful distance from Simone. "The pilot will dump the helicopter in the sea," he said quietly. "The trail ends here. Kang thinks we're dead or running for the border. He won't look in the mountains. He thinks I hate silence." "Do you?" Simone asked, handing him a mug of tea. Sung Ho took it, his fingers brushing hers. The contact sent a jolt through both of them. "I used to," he admitted, looking into the dark liquid. "Silence forces you to think. And when you do what I do, thinking is dangerous." He looked up at her. But tonight, for the first time in 15 years, the silence doesn't feel like a judgment. It feels like a second chance. Simone studied him. "You lost everything tonight, Sung-ho. Your company, your reputation, your city." "No," he said, looking past her to the sleeping child by the fire. "I didn't lose anything that mattered. I just traded a kingdom for a home." The sun didn't rise so much as it bled into the sky, a pale, watery gray that filtered through the heavy mist of the Gyeonggi Mountains. Inside the safe house, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually signifies peace. But to Simone, waking up on the stiff leather sofa with a blanket thrown over her legs, it felt like the holding breath before a scream. She sat up, her body aching from the flight, the run, and the sheer weight of terror she had carried for 48 hours. She looked around. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. Maya was still asleep on the rug, curled into a tight ball, her breathing rhythmic and soft. But the chair by the window was empty. Simone stood up, the wooden floorboards cold beneath her bare feet, and walked to the heavy front door. She cracked it open. The air that rushed in was sharp with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. There, standing at the edge of the clearing where the ground dropped away into the valley below, was Sung-ho. He was still wearing his ruined suit trousers and a white dress shirt, stained with soot and dried blood, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He wasn't moving. He was just watching the fog drift through the trees, a statue carved from regret and resolve. Simone stepped out, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. She didn't say anything as she approached him. She just stood beside him, looking out at the nothingness. "I used to hate this view," Sung-ho said quietly, not turning to look at her. It felt empty. Lonely. He took a breath, watching his own vapor curl into the air. "Now it looks like a clean slate." "It's not clean, Sung-ho," Simone said, her voice gentle but firm. "It's just paused. Kang is still out there. The police are still looking for us. We can't stay here forever. Eventually, they'll check the satellite heat signatures. Eventually, they'll find a way up the mountain." Sung-ho nodded slowly. "I know." He turned to face her. In the morning light, he looked older. The invincibility was gone, replaced by a weary humanity. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the shipping containers, about the children. And? And I realized that hiding isn't enough," he said. "If we stay here, we're just waiting to be found. We're waiting to die." His eyes hardened, the obsidian glint returning, but different this time. It wasn't the look of a gangster protecting his turf. It was the look of a father protecting his home. "To be truly safe, Simone, the Empire has to die. Not just Kang, all of it. The roots, the accounts, the leverage. It all has to burn." Before Simone could respond, the heavy wooden door creaked open behind them. "Daddy?" Sung-ho spun around faster than he ever had in a fight. Maya stood in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her stuffed elephant dragging on the floor. She looked small against the backdrop of the towering pines, her hair a mess of curls. She stepped out onto the porch, shivering in her thin shirt. Sung-ho was there in 2 strides, scooping her up into his arms, tucking her against his chest to share his warmth. "I'm here, Maya. I'm here." "Are the bad men gone?" she asked into his neck. Sung-ho looked over her head at Simone. He held her gaze, a silent communication passing between them. A pact. "Yes," Sung-ho said to his daughter, his voice thick with emotion. "They're gone, and I'm going to make sure they never come back." "How?" Maya asked, pulling back to look at his bruised face. "By doing the right thing," he said, "even though it's hard." He carried her back inside, Simone following close behind. The decision had been made in the quiet of the dawn. Sung-ho wasn't going to fight a war with guns anymore. He was going to fight with the one weapon Kang didn't think he had the courage to use. The truth. He was going to destroy himself to save them. An hour later, sat around the rough wooden table with mugs of instant coffee. Sung-ho laid a burner phone on the table. It was the only piece of tech he had allowed into the house. "I need to make a call," he said. "Not to my men, not to a fixer." He looked at Simone. "I need the number of that contact you used to have, the liaison at the Ministry of Justice, the one you said was incorruptible." Simone's eyes widened. "Prosecutor Min? Sung-ho, if you call him. There's no going back. He'll arrest you. You'll go to prison." "I know," Sung-ho said calmly. "But if I turn myself in, if I hand over the servers, the ledgers, the names, I get to dictate the terms. I trade my freedom for your safety. I trade my empire for Kang's head on a platter." "You'd go to jail?" Simone asked, her voice trembling. "For us?" Sung-ho looked at Maya, who was happily drawing a picture on the back of an old map with a calm focus that mirrored his own. "I missed 6 years," he said softly. "I'd rather spend the next 10 in a cell knowing she's safe than spend one day in a penthouse wondering when they're coming for her." He pushed the phone toward Simone. "Make the call." The phone sat on the rough wooden table like an unexploded bomb. Simone's fingers hovered over the keypad, trembling slightly. She knew the number by heart. Prosecutor Min was the only man in the South Korean justice system who hadn't taken a bribe in 20 years. He was also the man who had spent his entire career trying to put Lim Sung-ho in a cage. Dialing this number was the end of the road. It was the moment the story stopped being a thriller and started being a tragedy. She looked at Sung-ho. He was sitting across from her, watching Maya color in the corner. He looked peaceful, resigned. He gave a small nod. "Do it." Simone pressed call. The ringing sound was tinny and loud in the silent cabin. "Prosecutor Min?" A sharp, impatient voice answered on the second ring. "It's Simone Clark," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. There was a long pause. "Ms. Clark, you're a hard woman to find. Half the police force in Seoul is looking for you. They say you were kidnapped." "I wasn't kidnapped," Simone said, her eyes locking with Sung-ho's. "I was rescued. And I have someone here who wants to make a deal." She slid the phone across the table. Sung-ho picked it up. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "Min," Sung-ho said, his voice deep and calm. "Stop looking for the ghosts. I'm ready to come in." "Chairman Lim." Min's voice changed, losing its impatience, replaced by a wary intensity. "If this is a game, I don't have time for it." "No games," Sung-ho said. "I'm offering you the head of the snake. Not just me. Everything, the ledgers, the corrupt politicians on the payroll, the trafficking routes my second-in-command set up behind my back. I will give you the keys to the kingdom, Min. I will give you Kang Dae-won and everyone who stood with him. And the price? Min asked. Immunity for Simone Clark, Sung-ho said, looking at the woman who had changed his life. And protection for the child. Absolute government-level protection. They disappear. Their names are scrubbed. They never existed. And for you? Sung-ho looked out the window at the fog lifting off the mountains. I surrender. No resistance. I plead guilty to all charges. You get the win of the century. Silence stretched across the line. Done, Min said. Where are you? Gyeonggi Province. The old logger's cabin on the North Ridge. You have 2 hours before I change my mind. Sung-ho ended the call. He set the phone down and exhaled. A long, slow breath that seemed to carry 15 years of weight out of his body. It's done, he said. The next 2 hours were the longest of Simone's life. They didn't pack. There was nothing to take. Instead, they sat together. Sung-ho held Maya on his lap, telling her a story about a tiger who learned to eat grass so he wouldn't hurt the rabbits. It was a clumsy metaphor, but Maya listened with wide, rapt eyes, unaware that her father was writing his own eulogy. At 10 a.m., the sound of rotors cut through the valley again. But this time, it wasn't a stealth helicopter. It was a squadron. Blue and white police choppers banked over the trees. Sirens wailed from the service road below. They're here, Simone whispered, standing up. Panic flared in her chest. Sung-ho, are you sure? Sung-ho stood up, gently setting Maya down. He straightened his ruined shirt, buttoning the cuffs. He ran a hand through his hair. Even in the dirt and blood, he possessed a dignity that was unshakable. I'm sure, he said. He walked to the door and opened it. Outside, tactical teams were already moving through the trees, rifles raised. Prosecutor Min stood in the clearing, flanked by federal agents. Stay inside, Sung-ho ordered Simone. Then he looked down at Maya. He knelt one last time. Daddy, who are those men? Maya asked, sensing the fear in the air. They're the good guys, Maya, Sung-ho lied, smiling a heartbreaking, genuine smile. They're here to take me to work. I have to go away for a while, to fix the bad things. Will you come back? Sung-ho swallowed hard. I will always be watching over you, even if you can't see me. You are the best thing I ever did, Maya. Never forget that. He kissed her forehead, lingering for a second, memorizing the scent of her hair, the warmth of her skin. Then he stood up. He walked out onto the porch, raising his hands in the air. Lim Sung-ho, Min shouted over the megaphone. Get on your knees. Sung-ho didn't kneel. He walked down the steps, his eyes fixed on the prosecutor. He looked like a king abdicating his throne, not a criminal being caught. Agents swarmed him, kicking his legs apart, slamming him against the wall of the cabin, cuffing his hands behind his back. Inside, Simone held Maya tight, burying the girl's face in her shoulder so she wouldn't see the rough treatment. But Simone watched. She watched through the window as they dragged him toward the waiting vehicles. Just before they shoved him into the back of an armored van, Sung-ho turned. He looked at the window. He couldn't see them through the reflection. But he knew they were there. He nodded once. A silent goodbye. As the convoy drove away, kicking up dust and gravel, Simone felt tears streaming down her face. The empire had fallen. The dragon of soul was in chains. But as she looked down at Maya, who was safe, whole, and alive, she knew that for the first time in his life, Lim Sung-ho had won. The fall of the Chung Ha Group was not the spectacular explosion the media had hoped for. It was a surgical dismantling, executed with the cold precision of the evidence Sung Ho had handed over. For weeks, the news cycle in South Korea was dominated by the dragon's confession. Prosecutor Min was true to his word, but more importantly, Sung Ho was true to his. The servers found in the safe house contained a decade of receipts. In a luxury villa on the outskirts of Incheon, Kang Dae-won was arrested while trying to board a private boat to the Philippines. He didn't fight. He just watched the news feed on his phone as he was cuffed, realizing that the man he thought had gone soft had actually outmaneuvered him from a jail cell. Sung Ho hadn't just burned the bridge, he had nuked the entire landscape. The trafficking ring was exposed, the corrupt politicians were named, and the accounts were frozen. The empire of shadows evaporated under the harsh light of public scrutiny. Simone watched it all from a safe house in Switzerland, a location known only to prosecutor Min. She watched the trial on a laptop screen, holding Maya's hand. She saw Sung Ho stand before the judges, wearing a prison uniform instead of a tailored suit. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were clear. When the judge asked for his plea, he didn't hesitate. "Guilty," he said. He took the blame for everything. The violence, the money laundering, the crimes of the men he had failed to control. He took the weight of the entire organization on his shoulders so that it would die with him. The sentence was severe. 20 years. When the gavel banged down, echoing through the laptop speakers, Maya started to cry. "Is he never coming back?" she asked. Simone closed the laptop. "He did this so we could be free, Maya. He's safe, and we're safe. That's what matters." 5 years later. The coastal town in Maine was quiet, smelling of salt spray and pine. It was a world away from the neon frenzy of Seoul and the humidity of Atlanta. Simone sat on the porch of a small white chapboard house, watching a girl run along the shoreline. Maya was 11 now. She was tall for her age, her legs long, her hair wild in the ocean breeze. She was happy. She went to school, she played soccer, she had friends who didn't know that her father was a legend in the Korean underworld. But she hadn't forgotten. Every month, a letter arrived. It was always on plain paper, inspected by prison censors, bearing a Seoul postmark. And every month, Maya wrote back. She sent drawings, report cards, pressed flowers from the garden. It was a relationship built in ink and patience. "Mom!" Maya shouted from the beach, waving an envelope. "It came." Simone smiled, sipping her coffee. It was visitation week. The flight to Seoul was a yearly ritual now. They didn't stay in the penthouse. That building belonged to a tech conglomerate now. They stayed in a small hotel near the prison. The visitation room was sterile, smelling of bleach and despair, divided by a thick pane of reinforced glass. Simone sat in the back, letting Maya take the chair. When Sung Ho walked in, he looked different. There was gray in his hair now at the temples. The lines around his eyes were deeper. But he smiled when he saw her, a smile that reached those amber eyes that still mirrored his daughter's. "You've grown," Sung Ho said into the receiver, pressing his hand against the glass. "I'm almost as tall as Mom now," Maya said proudly, pressing her own hand against his. The glass was cold, but the connection was warm. "I made the honor roll again, and I learned how to swim the butterfly stroke." Sung Ho listened to every word as if it were a sermon. He asked questions. He laughed. For 1 hour, he wasn't inmate 48227. He was a father. When the guard signaled that time was up, the mood shifted. It was always the hardest part. I have to go, Sung-ho said softly. I know, Maya said. She didn't cry anymore. She understood the sacrifice now. I'll write to you on Tuesday. I'll be waiting. Sung-ho looked past her then to where Simone stood by the door. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The nod was enough. Thank you. Simone nodded back. I've got her. I always will. As they walked out of the prison gates into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Korean afternoon, Maya took Simone's hand. Do you think he's happy? Maya asked, looking back at the high concrete walls. Simone looked at the fortress that held the man she had once feared and then loved. She thought about the empire he had dismantled, the violence he had ended, and the legacy he had chosen to rewrite. He's free, Maya, Simone said, squeezing her daughter's hand. In the only way that matters, he is finally free. They turned away from the prison and walked toward the bus stop. Two figures moving forward into a life that was bright, ordinary, and beautifully safe.